Colby Tootoosis is our next speaker. He'll bring us into our lunch break here today. Colby is the headman for Poundmaker First Nation, and from the age of 18, Colby's been working in the front lines of community-focused Indigenous youth resurgence and empowerment work. Colby's work centers on breaking the unhealthy circles and behaviors that we often find ourselves in community, and with his experience on national youth councils and representing his community and other youth at the provincial level, Colby brings that type of energy and focus to his work today. Colby is focused on helping to develop a new generation of empowered, energetic leadership at the community and youth levels. He will be presenting for us this morning. Please help me in welcoming Mr. Colby Tootoosis.
They would separate the parents from the children, put the parents over here, rear the children themselves to be slaves. So daddy would pray in the original language. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. God is great. But when one of the children would speak any word of the mother tongue, they would kill that child. So I couldn't hear nobody pray. So you grew up in America without a knowledge of yourself. If you don't know God and you don't know self, but you have an education, then the education will serve the person who gives it to you. And you are educated not to serve yourself, but to serve them. And that's why you cry today. Once you have the knowledge of God and the knowledge of self, you have that requisite knowledge that will make all empirical knowledge valuable to you and make you a savior of those who suffer from that circumstance. Then David the psalmist says, ye are all God's children of the Most High God. They would separate the parents from the children, put the parents over here, rear the children themselves to be slaves.
It's time to turn on the volume a bit. It's time for us to break the rules. It's time for us to break rules that have been determining and having influence on our quality of life as Indigenous people. And in order for me to know the rules and to understand the rules, I have to have some basic understanding about systems. And I have to have some awareness of how systems operate and how they work. Because systems are invisible. We don't see them, but they have such a strong influence on our lives. And one of the basic examples I can think of a system is a bike. And it doesn't matter what kind of system, whether if it's a governing system, an education system, a health system, systems are governed by a specific law called the law of disparative structures. And I have to understand how this law operates so that I know how to disrupt systems and how to break the rules in regards to systems. Why do we have to break the rules in regard to systems? Because we're not getting the results that we want as Indigenous people in regards to the quality of life of our children. So I got to break the rules because I also have to be aware of what kind of results are we receiving as a result of the system. Because the reality is our children are beautiful, our children are brilliant. There's this innate genius that exists in the very heart and the very core of who we are as Indigenous people in regards to our relationship to the land and our prayer way of life. The children aren't the problem. And oftentimes we end up believing that in order for me to change the system, I have to change the image of the system. And we look for the problems and to point fingers at problems, and we end up pointing at the image of those problems. An example is people. So an example is we all want to change a system, but we don't necessarily know how to even describe a system at the same time. And the law of disparate of structures gives us an idea, gives us an image of systems. What else are some of the results that we see in regards to who we are, in regards to the system? Well, the reality is that a lot of our children are being predefined. So an example is, Chris, do I have the right to define who you are? No. You ask anybody in this room in their right mind if I have the right to define who you are, the answer would be no. And I'm glad you're in your right mind, Chris. And you ask children that. I ask children that, when I go into schools, talk to kids, go into classrooms, I ask that, do I have the right to define who you are? And they say no. But the reality is there's a system that exists that sees itself and has this presence of self-proclaimed superiority, and it has this idea that it has the right to define who we are as Indigenous people. And what happens is when we become so ingrained and so entrenched in a system, what happens, we begin to identify ourselves as that system to the point where that system begins to meet our basic needs. And when a system is meeting my basic needs, I begin to rationalize and justify its existence to the point where I'll defend it when there's topics or discussions around an alternative to that same system. So I have to break the rules. And I have to think critically. I have to be willing to approach stepping outside the paradigm and face the uncomfortability that brings in questioning systems. The uncomfortability that happens when we break the rules. The law of disparate of structures, what that means is in order for a system to exist and for a system to be stable, it seeks to balance itself. And whether we like it or not, we're always going to be governed by systems. They can take the galaxies. The galaxy is a system. Solar systems make up the galaxy. Planets can make up the solar system. Planet Earth is a system in itself. Planet Earth has an ecosystem. We look at the basic biology of who we are as human beings, and we have these bodies. And our bodies are a system. We have organs that make up a whole system of who we are. Every cell has its own little system inside the little cell, and each little part has its role, right down to the level of molecules, and you go even smaller to the level of molecules, and we see, we get into like quantum mechanics and quantum physics, where there's just this light, where there's just waves of potential, where there's just nothing but energy. And I have to be able to understand and be aware of where systems exist. And when we're talking about the indigenous perspective of systems, we begin to see that, the land is a system. And there's these colonial ideas that exist where a human being is superior to the land. Indigenous people, have been saying and have been operating and living a way of life since the beginning of time that states that, no, you can't govern the land. It's the land that governs you. The land governs the human being. At the end of the day, the land is going to decide the outcome of humanity. And when I step into and open into that realization, then it's like there's this humility and this surrender to serve life and to be part of life. And that's the take, that's the approach we take when we work with children and with young people. The law of disparate of structures seeks balance. Systems seek balance. There's this natural balance that exists. And so what that means is that the amount of energy, here's an example with a system. Let's use the bike. The amount of energy that goes into a system, the system is designed to dish out the equal amount of output. Input has to be equivalent to the output within a system. But what happens with this disruptive structures is life tends to evolve itself. And what happens is systems get stressed when the environment changes and the system resists that change. And you can apply that to the current education system because people have this idea that, well, I want to go into the system and change the system from the inside. But the law of disruptive structures, disparative structures, completely dissolves that notion. It's like saying, okay, well, the system's broken. Well, the car is broken. My car is broken. In order for me to fix the car, then we have to give the car a new paint job. So it means we'll elect new people or we'll appoint new people to administrate that system. And we'll expect the system to run as brand new. But that's not the case. The car will still be broken because systems give 94% of the results that we receive in life. And when we look at the education system, we begin to see that what's the result of the overall system? Well, what are we teaching our kids? One of the results is that our kids are learning to be consumers. They're beginning to see themselves that they are superior to the land, is the result. What else are some of the results? They're beginning to agree that the system defines who they are, and they're beginning to see themselves as inferior or less than to the colonizer. They're beginning to subdue themselves and agree to the current psychology that the system is teaching our children. If you really think about it, a lot of our people, we're still in this battle. We're still in this war as Indigenous people. And it's like a Cold War. It's like a Cold War that's based on policy and psychological manipulation, where our young people are being defined in who they are and how they are to conduct themselves. So I need to break the rules. I need to be able to break the rules and embody that rule breaking so that children who are seeing me breaking the rules, they'll automatically have the permission to break the rules as well. So systems become stressed when they resist environmental changes. So an example is with the bike. The bike is designed to handle Colby energy. So what that means is the amount of energy I put into the bike is going to determine how fast I'm going to go. Now, say you put the Hulk on the bike. That bike's not designed to handle Hulk energy. And what's going to happen is the bike is going to reach a point of critical mass. It's going to reach a point of crisis. And it's at that point, and this applies to any system, it's that point of critical mass, that point of crisis, of whether the bike has to decide whether to evolve or to dissolve. And oftentimes, it's at that point where those who are getting their needs met from a system, where they begin to defend that system. They take an alternative personally, and they begin to sabotage any potential outcomes of systems changes. They begin to sabotage alternative paradigms and alternative way of thinking. And so I love systems. I think systems are really remarkable, especially natural systems, the universal systems. But as human beings, we've gotten really shitty at trying to mimic natural systems. We're not good at it. We're not good at mimicking natural systems. And so let's look at a human being system. What determines the stress of systems that human beings create? Well, it's emotion. Emotion drives systems, and we're completely governed by emotions. We make decisions in life based on emotion. In fact, we make decisions based on avoiding emotional pain. We'll do whatever it takes not to feel emotional pain. In fact, every decision that we make, oftentimes throughout our day, is based on avoiding fear, shame, grief. Ultimately, it's avoiding vulnerability. And when we make these decisions to avoid these emotions, it's almost as if we begin to automatically comply and give in to the current system that's around us. And so we have to really understand emotions, because when I was a kid and I was going to school, nobody really taught me much about emotions. They never really taught me much about grief. They didn't teach me about shame. It was almost as if everybody had to wear these masks of shamelessness, or people had to pretend that everything was emotionally okay. And as a result, I began to comply what everybody else was doing, and I became emotionally shut down. And when I became emotionally shut down, my creativity also got shut down. Because oftentimes we begin to witness and begin to observe that the current curriculum that we're seeing and that we're teaching our children is based on attempting to intellectualize change. But intellectualizing change doesn't come from the mind. It comes from the emotion and the passion that exists, that's willing to break the rule and break the barriers of that system. So let's take a look at my body, the body system. If you have a body, and obviously we all have a body, our bodies are specifically designed and engineered to feel emotions. We're supposed to feel emotions. But what happens is when we experience, and we experience grief, we learn that there's something wrong with us when we're feeling vulnerability, when we're feeling grief, when we're feeling shame. And systems have a really insidious way of shaming. But what is shame? And what is guilt? And I really appreciate how Dr. Brene Brown, she talks about shame and guilt. And what these shame researchers do is they really break down the difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is more of a behavior. Shame is more of an identity. An example is, say I come here and I'm giving this speech and I write out on my bike, and somebody in the audience, gets mad at me saying, "What are you doing? You're not supposed to ride a bike when you're giving a keynote. You don't know how to give keynotes. Who taught you how to give keynotes?" What I'll do is, if I could feel guilty about it. If I take it personally, I'll feel guilty, and I'll say what I did was wrong. I shouldn't have done that. If I take it personally. And the difference between guilt and shame is if I felt ashamed, the thought would be that I am wrong, that there is something inherently wrong with me, that I'm worthiness, that I'm not worthy enough to give a keynote, that I'm not worthy enough to break some rules. So emotions are so important. They need to be magnified. They need to be understood at all levels, within myself, within teachers, so that I'm able to cradle and embrace children to go through their emotional experiences in life. And what happens is when we feel ashamed, when we feel outside, we feel ostracized. When we're feeling on the outside, we begin to put the lampshade on. We begin to play small. And when we begin to play small, we begin to comply and give in to the presence of superiority that's striving to achieve its agenda to continue to assimilate who we are as Indigenous people. The reality is, as Indigenous people, we exist outside any human system, if you really think about it. Our way of life and our connection to the land and how we operate and live with the land, it exists outside the current systems, the current paradigm. But it's almost as if we are expected to live in these two worlds. And I don't like that idea of living in two worlds. I'm gonna live my Indigenous way of life. And if that upsets somebody who feels that their system is superior to mine, then who cares? Because I'm here to break the rule. And when you really think about it, a lot of our children it's almost as if our young people have been graced and gifted with the latest updates of human awareness. You can't talk down to them. You can't talk to them as if they're stupid, because they'll figure you out. They'll know where you're coming from. They'll see the mask that we often wear. And children are designed, it's almost as if our young people are designed, they're destined to think with their heart. But oftentimes, the current system that's in place teaches our children not to think with their heart. It teaches our children to think with their mind. It's almost as if our minds, our young people are being conditioned that your mind has to tell your heart what to do. And knowing who I am and where I come from, that's the complete opposite in terms of Indigenous awareness and Indigenous consciousness. My heart should always tell my mind what to do. Even, here's an example. An example is this bike. I seen this bike at Walmart, and I'm like, man, I want that bike. And my girlfriend, Andrea, she's like, you don't need that bike. When are you going to ever ride it, You're not going to ride that bike. I'm like, no, I need it. And I was trying to think of a way, well, how can I get that bike? And I thought, I know, I'll ride it on stage, and I'll use this as an example. So I did. I went to Walmart, and I bought the bike, and there it was. It's on stage. Because it's the basic example of systems and how systems operate. One of the other laws of systems is looking at the 15% of the handoff. So what I mean by that is if you want to change a system, all I need to do is change 20% of that system. If I change 20% of that system, 80% is going to follow through. And this is from the systems expert, W. Edwards Deming. And you can Google his name. You can see some of the work that he's done. He wrote a book called Out of the Crisis. He says if you approach 20% of a system, 80% will fall into place. It'll take care of itself. What he also says is all you need to do within that 20% is focus on the 15% of the handoff of that system. And when I began to really understand and began to inquire and began to investigate and evaluate systems, it's really about recognizing where does that 15% exist in systems. An example of the 15% of systems with a bike would be me riding the bike and putting the energy into the pedals so the bike goes. I am within that 15% that makes that system functional. When you look at systems within humanity, because when we're talking about Indigenous awareness, Indigenous consciousness, it's really about the restoration of humanity, restoring humanity, where the oppressed no longer agree to be the oppressed, where the oppressed begin to break the rules that the oppressor, bestows upon them. And it's really acknowledging that 15% is crucial because that's where our schools exist. Our schools are the 15% to humanity. Our schools are 15% to the outcome and the result of where we want our people to be 7 generations down the line. It's crucial to begin to evaluate and question what system is in place that's determining the quality of life of not of our children, but our grandchildren. Systems thinking. Systems thinking can be taught to children. Even understanding, if you can understand how a bike operates as children do, understand how a bike operates, children can learn about systems. And they can begin to apply systems-based approaches, systems-based solutions in their life. Are there any questions? I'm so used to running like a really interactive workshop, so I really rely on questions a lot. How much? 10 minutes left? That's a lot of time. Do you want me to ride the bike? I can go no hands. No, we're really wanting to highlight how important it is. What also exists in that 15% in regards to our family systems is forgiveness. Anyone who questions forgiveness hasn't experienced the power of the freedom and the liberation that exists in it. Forgiveness is that 15% that will improve 80% of our relationships with amongst our families between families, and it would extend within our community, and it'll extend beyond into our Indigenous nationhood. So what is forgiveness? My dad has this really cool definition of forgiveness. And one of the things that he says is forgiveness is giving up and letting go of a different yesterday. Forgiveness is letting go and giving up the hope of a different yesterday. Who is it? Nelson Mandela, one of the things that he says is not forgiving is like drinking poison and expecting your enemy to die. Not forgiving is like drinking poison expecting the other person to die. And I love forgiveness. I get high off forgiveness. And I say that because, I've lived a life that the best that I can. And it's been really challenging, and that has included, abstaining from drugs, abstaining from alcohol. And it's something that I rarely ever mention because I rarely ever talk about it. But it's also been very, very challenging because it's also, it goes against the norm in regards to what the social systems have in regards to young people. And so for me, where I get my highs is from forgiveness. There was this other really cool point about forgiveness, but I forget what it was. The point was letting go. Because oftentimes you have people, when you're feeling really upset and you have so much anger, you're feeling depressed and you're feeling down and you try to consult with your friend, your bro or your sister, and you're like, I'm feeling really down. And your friend says, well, you got to let go. You got to let go of it. And it's like, well, I don't know how. How do you let go? And nobody has an answer of how you let go. So I want to give an example of letting go, because letting go is like instantaneous freedom. And our people have the right to be free. There's this inherent right to be free. So I needed a volunteer. Thank you, Chris. Come on up here. Let's give Chris a round of applause. Better hurry up. You only got 5 minutes left. So, Chris, I have a pen, and you're going to demonstrate letting go. So you're going to take this pen and hold it up high as if you're at an Idle No More rally. Okay? Now let it go. Let's give a round of applause. No, stay. Still some more. I'm going to ask you some questions. What did you have to do to let go of the pen?
Open my hand.
He had to open his hand. That's the key word. I have to be open to letting go. What did you have to do to your hand?
Extend it.
Well, for your hand to let go, what did your hand have to do? Your whole physiology. Let loose. He used the words let loose. The word that I'm looking for, I'm going to tell you because we only got 5 minutes.
Okay.
The word I'm looking for is relax.
I relaxed.
I relaxed. So the only thing I need to do to let go in my life, to let go of any emotion, because it can be really challenging. I've had my, thank you, Chris, let's give him a round of applause. To let go of any emotion in my life, which has been really challenging at times where I need someone outside, to help me and to help me work through. Oftentimes I've had to rely on our way of life, on our prayer way of life, to do that. But what it is, it's really about opening and relaxing. And letting go happens on its own. I have to be open, and I have to relax to letting go. And that's what we need to do collectively, to be willing to break the rule of the current system that's in place. And that's what we need to do to let go of the current system in place. I remember when I was in grade 9, I thought to myself, you know what, I don't like school. I hate school. In fact, what I'm going to do, what I want to do, and I had this prayer that I want to build my own school. I'm going to create my own school. And what was really cool is without even telling my brother Chris, he goes to school, becomes a teacher, and he tells me, I'm going to build my own school, bro. I'm like, yeah. And guarantee there's lots of people out there across Indigenous country who are saying the same thing. Good, do that. Build your school because we need thousands of them. We need thousands of them that's going to create an alternative, that's going to embrace the emotional intelligence that exists in humanity, that's going to facilitate the restoration of humanity, so that this innate genius and creativity that comes from the passion will begin to reveal itself, so that our children and our children's children, 7 generations down the line, will begin to reconnect with who they are. And the land will support that. Because at the end of the day, the land's going to decide our fate anyway. So with that, praise God, praise be to God, and all those who serve God, praise life, praise be to life, and all those who serve God, serve life. And may all your dreams come true before the revolution.